right, welcome everyone. I'm going to turn it on over to Laurel. Laurel, you can take it away. And I'll be monitoring the chat if you don't have it on in case there's any questions.
That would be amazing. Thank you for having us and Lisa for scheduling me. So I'm sharing my screen. Hopefully I could see some thumbs up that everybody can see the screen. And let me just slideshow it from the beginning. Here we go. So I did go and get certified with California as a forms trainer because this form for the fire zones is so misunderstood that I really wanted to make sure that I could teach agents in our area that we provide a natural hazard to about the FHDS form and who needs to fill it out and really understanding it as a listing agent or a buyer's agent and the ramifications that come from what your buyer may be taking on or your seller is selling. So that's what we're going to focus on today in this presentation, but I am going to give you some nuggets that will help you build more business, believe it or not, right inside the natural hazard disclosure. So I'll share those as well. So for the purposes of the FHDS, just know this. This is what the law requires. You've got two maps when you order this disclosure source NHD. The first map is the state or statutory map. That is the map that drives whether or not your seller needs to fill out the FHDS form. The other map is local supplemental disclosures, and those don't drive this form, but they give greater transparency for a seller to a buyer on what they're buying in. You'll notice at the bottom of the state and the local maps, there's boxes that are checked. It's a yes or a no. Are they in a zone or not? So take a look at those boxes when you look at the NHD, and it will tell you which zones they're in. If it's a FEMA map zone, an earthquake zone, a wildland fire area, or a high fire or very high fire severity zone. And then, of course, next to the yes, you're going to see an asterisk that's going to tell you what you need to do, which is go deeper into the report, explain it to your buyer and your seller of what they fall in. And also, if there's no box checked at all, which you can see on the sample I have here, that means that they haven't mapped it for that area. So that's why sometimes you'll see no box checked at all. So when we look at the signing page, there's a portion that recently on January 1st, the Assembly Bill 1280 passed, and that required that natural hazard disclosure companies not only disclose the fire zones and some other components, but also tell you whether or not the seller is in a high or very high severity zone, that it's a state responsibility area or a local responsibility area, because your seller is going to need to disclose that on the FHDS, and this will help them do so. And then also, you remember we talked about there's two different zones. There's the high fire and very high severity zone, and then there's the wild land. They both apply to the FHDS. So if you see that they're in a wildland area on that mapped page, we're going to want to go look at that closer. Another thing we provided on this single signing page would make it very easy for you. You don't have to have all these different signing pages. When they sign the signing page in the NHD with disclosure source, the buyer is agreeing that they've read the entire report and accept everything there and want to proceed forward. We've included the links to the EQ book, even though when we deliver the NHD to you, we also separately attach them. They're all linked on this signing page because the last time that CAR changed the residential purchase agreement, they added in that links are now considered acceptable as delivery. So those links for the EQ book, the lead-based paint, are all on that signing page as well. Like I mentioned, you're going to want to do a little bit of a deep dive if they end up in a fire zone where you want to look at what the severity is a little closer, maybe want to talk it over with your seller and buyer. And the report is live and interactive. So you simply take your cursor over the section, like this section is all about the statutory or state disclosures. And then we have all the local ones and then the additional disclosures. And then after that comes the page on advisories and taxes and EQ information. So I want to look at, if it said yes for wildland area, I'd click on that. And it would take me straight to that page. And it would tell me what kind of zone they're in, like an agent that I just was showing this morning. He said, does my seller have to fill out this form? I said, let's look at the wildland page. We clicked on it and it showed that the seller was in a moderate zone. So at this time, the seller would not need to provide, according to the law, the FHDS. But a high or very high, they would need to. So wildland also applies. This is the form in all its glory. This is the FHDS, the Fire Hardening and Defensible Space form. But you're going to notice sometimes that you don't get this from a seller, but you do get the WFDA, the Wildfire Disaster Advisory. This advisory becomes a very different advisory when a seller on the NHD is in the property is in a fire zone that's high or very high, because there are parameters where a seller may not be filling out the FHDS, the Fire Hardening and Defensible Space form, that talks about the responsibilities and who's going to take on what. And if they're not providing that, they're only providing the WFDA, that's going to open up a different conversation with you and your buyer. Now we're going to discuss who has to fill out the FHDS in its detail. So the first portion, the form is two things. It's fire hardening the home itself and are 5 feet around it. And the defensible space is the vegetation around the home within 100 feet of all sides of that structure. Sellers also create defensible space for other structures on their property. They have barns, they have tractor, garages and so forth, then they're going to want to create defensible space for those as well. But this is talking about the disclosure to a buyer of an actual residence. And so here's the fire hardening side of it. 1A, who has to fill this out? Number one, the property contains 1 to 4 units. That's residences, mobiles in parks or manufactured homes, condos, and townhomes. All of that applies. So 1 to 4 units, duplex, triplex, fourplex, single family, several homes on one parcel that are all residences, mobiles in parks, mobiles on their own land, townhomes, and condos. If they're in a condominium or a townhome, the association in a fire zone that requires defensible space will have their documentation, but then the seller may have a little portion that they have to take care of and do things required by law. So they still have to provide this to a buyer. Number two, the seller is required to complete a TDS. So that is the reason why, if the seller is not filling out a TDS, they're not filling this form out. There's no way. So if they're not filling this out, if the seller isn't completing a TDS, your buyer's going to get the WFDA, the Wildfire Disaster Advisory. And that's a different conversation that you're going to want to have with your buyer. A very serious conversation of buying in fire zone that's going to require certain things that the seller just isn't talking about with them, disclosing to them. And you will talk about that more in a moment. Number three, the property is located in a high or very high severity zone. So right now it's just high and very high. Fire zones and wildland fire areas both apply. They're talking about adding moderate in, but they didn't do it. They were going to at the beginning of the year, but they backed off from that because this became such a huge challenge for so many homeowners and for CAL FIRE and the local fire departments that they're waiting on that. That probably will come down pretty soon, so be prepared for that. And number four, the improvements on the property were constructed before January 1st of 2010. Now, this is where a lot of agents get confused. Do I need to provide this disclosure and defensible space and home hardening disclosure if my home was built in 2020? Absolutely yes. Again, absolutely yes. This portion, it's discussing if any of these 4 conditions are not met, that is 1 to 4 units in filling out a TDS in a high or very high severity zone, then the seller, if they meet those 3, but the home was built after 2010, then the seller gets to skip over paragraph 2B. But if their home was built prior to January 1st of 2010, the seller will have to fill out section 2B. So to be or not to be, we're going to discuss that in a few minutes. The second portion of this disclosure and or addendum is the defensible space, the vegetation around the home. So, and other structures. So this is the requirements for that portion of this disclosure. Number one, property contains 1 to 4 units, the same as the first part. Number two, the seller is required to complete a TDS. And number three, it's in a high or very high severity zone, fire severity zone. Wildland applies it as well, remember. So this portion is the defensible space section. So let's go to the next part of this form, which is the fire hardening, the house itself and 5 feet around. These are the questions for a homeowner whose home was built prior to January 1st of 2010 that need to be completed. Now you'll notice it asks in 2B, are you seller aware of the following features that make your home vulnerable, may make your home vulnerable to wildfire and flying amber? So all of these items here in newer homes built after 2010, they had to do certain things that are not that are addressed here on this 2B section, like eave soffit and roof ventilation in an excess of 1/8 of an inch without flame or ember resistance. So what that is when you walk up to the house and you look under the eaves, sometimes you'll see these holes. Have you ever seen that in the eaves, the holes that allow air out of the attic, the ventilation? And sometimes they'll have mesh behind them so birds and rats and stuff doesn't get in their attic through those squares or those little rectangles or holes. Well, older homes might not have any eave soffit and roof ventilation vents, and newer homes have it. It was part of the code. So a seller has to check whether or not they know if their eave soffit and roof ventilation is in an excess of 1/8 of an inch. Well, who's going to know that? How many sellers know that? Most sellers are like, I have no idea. So they can check the box no if they're not aware, because the question there is, are you seller aware of this feature that makes your home vulnerable? So if I don't know the answer, I'm going to check no. If I know that I have a problem, I have those holes without the correct, vents that have an opening that's greater than an eighth. If I know that, I'm going to check yes. Number two, roof coverings made of untreated wood shingles or wood shakes. Doesn't say wood, but it's both wood shake and wood shingle here. Treatments last about 8 months. So if you got your roof treated 5 years ago, it's no longer. If you have a shake roof, I think you know it. Here's where the no isn't the I'm not aware. This is where it becomes no, it doesn't exist. If you have a tile roof, a comp roof, a gravel roof, a tar gravel roof, a metal roof, then you would check no, because none of that exists, that you don't have a wood shingle or wood shake roof. So that's where it becomes nope, it doesn't exist. 3, combustible landscaping or other materials within 5 feet of the home and under the footprint of any attached deck. Well, there's Pandora's box. Combustible landscaping, big ticket, big number to remember, big thing to remember for your sellers. Don't put bark or mulch of any kind, even the fake tire bark, in the planter beds around the house. CAL FIRE will ask you, or the local fire department, if you're in a high or very high severity zone, you're going to have to pull it out to pass your inspection. So if you're getting ready to go on a listing and you're talking to the seller, and I'm going to show you how you can get prepared for your listing and know if they're in a fire zone ahead of time, big nugget is don't put bark or mulch in your planter beds around your house. The other things that are combustible are things like trees with their limbs hanging over the roof line, or dead bushes or dead plants, high grasses, leaves and debris in the flower beds, the planter beds around the house. And some of the interesting things that you don't have to remove but are flammable, and if there was a fire coming, they'd want you to move it away, are teak or patio furniture that's flammable with cushions on them, the cushions. If a fire is coming, CAL FIRE knows that you're going to use your patio furniture typically, but if a fire is coming, they'd like you to pull that stuff away from your house and then take the cushions and throw them in the shed. But they don't want to see wood piles stacked up against your house or under your house, under the decks. They don't want to, they want to see them with a tarp over them out in past in the 30-foot range. They don't want to see shades hanging out there if there's a fire coming, but you can have them. You just need to be able to take them down. If the fire is over the ridge and you're preparing to leave, then you can move that gas barbecue out of the way. There's things like that that you're typically going to have on your deck or near your home, but don't stack wood piles because you can't move a wood pile within 5 or 10 minutes of trying to prep to leave for a fire. So there are certain things they're looking for that they don't want to see at all, and other things they'll allow, but you will need to move them if a wildfire was coming. So those are the combustible landscaping and other materials. Single pane or non-timbered glass windows, most people know if they have single pane windows, and they would check yes if they know that. Loose or missing bird stopping or roof flashing. What's bird stopping? Those wires that stick up that stop the birds from building little nests. And or roof flashing. This is an interesting one. So we all know, we've seen a roof inspection or two. We know what flashing is, right? And so that's that metal that kind of comes around your air gaps, your chimney, it kind of comes around, and then your roofing comes up over it. If that's missing, then what do you have under the flashing? Typically is you're going to have paper, tar paper, or some kind of paper, but then under that is the wood deck. And if the flashing is pulled up or missing, that's going to be problematic if there's a wildfire, because an ember could land on that wood and catch your roof on fire. So if you don't know if you have it, I've never been on my roof. I don't know about how many here have been on their roof, but if you don't know if you have missing flashing, you can check the box, no, I'm not aware. But what happens if you get a buyer, they have a home inspection, the inspection shows that the roof has issues, has missing flashing and or missing bird stopping. Now you as a seller become aware, and you're going to refill this document out correctly if the buyer walks and you have a new buyer in place, because you now have that knowledge that that flashing is missing. So there's some of these that an inspector in an inspection will find as an issue and put on his home inspection, and now you become aware as a seller you will need to refill this out for a new buyer if that transaction falls out of escrow, and you'll have to fill it out with the new knowledge that you have. Rain gutters without metal or non-combustible gutter covers. Obviously, if you don't have gutter covers, you got debris in your gutters, leaves, dry pine needles, whatever it is, the debris in the gutters. If that dries out, and the biggest fire month is October, when that debris in those gutters dries out, then it becomes like kindling for a wildfire. So if you don't have non-combustible gutter covers, then you're going to need to check that box yes as a seller. How we doing on the chat, Amy? Any questions so far?
No, no questions so far.
So now we're going to discuss the defensible space section of this disclosure and addendum. And that is basically where the rubber hits the road. This is where the seller is going to tell a buyer, hey, this is what I've done, or this is what I have not done. This is what I'm willing to do, or I'm not willing to do. And here's what I'm going to ask you to do as a buyer and take on. So this could be very expensive for a potential buyer. And that is a reason we have quite a few lawsuits in the state of California right now, because we have a lot of buyers who had no clue what they were purchasing, what the responsibilities that they were taking on. So it's really imperative that your seller disclose these things to a buyer. So 3A lets a seller say, am I subject to a local vegetation management zone or not? Remember on the NHD, the page where it required that assembly bill, where we're going to tell you if you're in a local or a state responsibility area, that will help your seller with that. If you're subject to a local vegetation management ordinance, you're going to want to check yes, it is, or it is not subject to that. Then 3B is where the seller represents their property, whether it's in compliance or not. Notice this is the default language that starts there are two defaults on this form. B1, seller is unaware whether the property is in compliance and doesn't have a report from a defensible space inspector. So if you receive this as a buyer's agent, nothing's checked. No time frames are there. They filled it out, but they have not checked anything and signed it, which is very common. That means that the seller is going to the default language. And that is B1, seller's unaware and doesn't have a report. And then we'll look at the other default in a moment. Or number two, which is a beautiful box to see if you're the buyer, the buyer's agent, seller is in compliance. And this is with only state law applies. And I have a report and I'll send it to you with this FHDS or this in this many days or in 3 days of the execution of this form. Or number three is where the property is not in compliance, but I'm going to get an inspection from the either state or local defensible space inspector, whichever applies. And I will also provide you that inspection report within X amount of days or 3 days after providing this. So this number 3B3, where it's not in compliance, but I'm going to get an inspection, is not saying I'll bring it into compliance. It's just a seller saying, I'll get the inspection for you. That's a little tough for some sellers because now you've opened up for the local fire department or the state fire department to come and do the inspection and then give you some time to get these things to get into compliance. And they'll come back and re-inspect for you. So your seller may or may not want to do that. But I'm going to talk about why that might be better than the alternative in the RPA, which is the Fortress Fire Report that a lot of buyers are requesting now because the seller would not give them this report and would not do anything, and what that's going to create for the seller. Here's the other default language, 3C1. This is where the buyer and seller come to an agreement. Here's where the rubber hits the road regarding which party is going to take on the responsibility and get the compliance. 3C1, buyer responsibility. There's no local ordinance. This is an area where you don't have a local ordinance and the buyer agrees to comply, get the documentation, in other words, create the defensible space, and it says they have a year after close of escrow. Here is the problem with that. There are very few, if any, insurance companies who will give them a year, even though they have up to a year after close, according to the real estate, our laws and CAL FIRE. Most insurance companies won't give them a year. So they need to understand that they're probably going to have to get it done as soon as possible so that they can be in compliance and their insurance company won't cancel them. Because I hear the cancellations happen all the time because they have not created defensible space. Here's the other portion of the form, the backside. And this is where when you're in a local vegetation management or in a point of sale, which means it must be done before you close escrow, these are the different options, or if the seller's working on it. So here's where we see who's taking on the responsibility. If the seller wants the buyer to take it on, you need to look closely at these boxes. Number two is a local vegetation management ordinance is in effect. So this is a local area and it requires it as compliance as a result of sale of the property. It lets either the buyer or the seller obtain documentation, but how many buyers are going to want to comply and get that documentation at close of escrow? It could cost thousands of dollars to do so, to get into compliance with tree trimming, tree removal, brush removal, and so forth. So this is kind of rare, but these do exist. There are certain areas that are point of sale. What I know is that Paradise is a point of sale. Truckee is a point of sale. They're right now voting on whether or not they're going to make El Dorado County a point of sale. That's going to blow up that area. It's going to be so challenging for those agents. Pray for them. Number three is the buyer responsibility, and this is more commonly seen than not, where there's a local vegetation management ordinance in effect, which does not require compliance as a result of sale of the property. And that is probably the one you're going to see more commonly checked. Number three, when a seller wants to give over the responsibility if they're in a local area that doesn't require it to be done prior to close of escrow. Remember, if they are not in a local, if they're in a state responsibility area and they don't want to do anything, they can just let the default language happen, which is on the previous side of the other page that we just read over. So they'll simply fill out, check the boxes if they have to, and sign this. So your buyer really wants to look closely at what they're taking on, their responsibility. 4, 5, and 6 are beautiful boxes as well, because this is where the sellers has completed it. It's in an area. Number 4 is where it requires compliance as a result of sale, and they've already got it all done, and they will give it to the buyer, the documentation that they have their certificate. Or 5 is where they're in either a state or local compliance, and they already have their certificate. It needs to be less than 6 months old to comply. Otherwise, if the seller had a certificate but it's past 6 months, they probably don't have a lot to do to get in compliance, so they can get CAL FIRE back out there or the local fire department to reissue a new cert that will be less than 6 months old. Number 6 is where they're agree to get the documentation and they're working on it, and they will provide it before final verification of condition. So there's quite a few ifs, ands there of what a person could do. But if you don't get that FHDS, the one we're looking at right now, remember, if your buyer gets the WFDA, the language there is driving them to the CAL FIRE website to see responsibilities, but those still apply to a buyer. So they really need to understand, hey, you want to buy where you're going to wake up and see trees and beauty, you have a responsibility. It's like buying a home with a pool. You have to clean that pool. You take on that responsibility with that purchase of that home. So homes in a fire zone, it's an ongoing responsibility to keep the vegetation trimmed down and create defensible space for your parcel. Here is a copy of the CAL FIRE inspection and what it looks like if your seller has one. Ask them if you can see it, if they have a copy of it, because you're going to want to look at the date, first of all, to make sure that it's less than 6 months old. And then you're going to want to look to see in the comments if they have nothing checked off in that list of those things that they're going to ask them to take care of. This is where that they're going to have to clean up their property, and whatever needs to be done is listed off. And then they'll come back out after they complete those items and redo the inspection and then give them a pass cert. And it will either say passed, or the last one I saw said real estate in the comments, but there should be no boxes checked. And then the date with all the homeowner information, the address, the inspector's name, their contact number, so you can recall them if you need to. And then it'll say no violations observed with the box checked if they passed. So that's what this looks like. Looks like we have someone in the chat. How long does it take for CAL FIRE to do these reports, and how expensive is it? Great question, Rebecca. Thank you. I was going to touch on that. So it all depends on what's going on in the area that they're protecting and defending, because there's 2 different agencies. There's the state responsibility areas and the local responsibility areas. Their acronyms are LRA and SRA. So if they're not fighting fires, we're looking at potentially a week or 2 out. If you need a quick, you got a quick close and you need it quickly, sometimes after you've scheduled it, you can reach out to them, reach back to them and say, hey, we're closing in 15 days. Could you get out here any sooner? Because from what I understand from the different inspectors that I've talked to over the past several years, they'll do all the inspections in one area and then move to another area and do all these. So they try to be smart about where they're driving to with their inspections. So if you're it's really important to understand your time frames and your timelines, because you might be waiting 2 weeks for them to come out and do an inspection or more if there are fires they're fighting in the area. So that's why it behooves a listing agent to really have this conversation with their seller about, what do you want to do? What's the end game here? Do you want to get this done ahead and really make this a lot easier to sell for someone buying in a fire zone? Or do you want to put the responsibility off on them? Because you can off it, if it's not a point of sale, you can push that off to a buyer. And you're not a horrible person for doing so. You might be an elderly lady who's going into a care facility and just can't do anything. Or you might be someone who got a job change for whatever reason. You don't want to take on the responsibility. You can push that off to a buyer, but it could cost you dearly for doing so. And I'm going to discuss that in just a moment and why. Because in the new residential purchase agreement, you might have seen the Fortress Fire Report, and we'll discuss that. So if they say pass or real estate, nothing's checked, they check this no violations observed, you have a current date that's less than 6 months old, you're golden. You're going to provide this with the FHDS to a buyer or after you get it done to the buyer. If the property is on federal land, there's no inspection. Federal land doesn't have inspections. So here's a great website for you to save that you can search. If you're getting ready to go out on a listing, you can go to the CAL FIRE website, which I have pulled up and I can show you as well. And we can search any property you want to. We also provide you in the NHD that we provide, there's an AB 38 notice. This tells you about if the property is located in a high or very high severity zone, what the requirements are, and that you need to do these things. And additionally, we give you a link to CAL FIRE Mothership to schedule your inspection. So there's that link. If you click on it in the live report, it's going to send you straight to their scheduling site. If CAL FIRE is not the responsible party to do the inspection, if it's a local fire department, they send it out to the correct local, and the local will schedule with your homeowner. Who can schedule this inspection? This is very important. So this is a government inspection. So no one but the homeowner, unless you have written permission, can schedule this inspection by law. That's in your residential purchase agreement. You cannot schedule this unless you have written permission from the seller. When you go to this link, it'll have you type in your name, the homeowner's name, the property address, the email, and the phone number of the homeowner to schedule the inspection with them. If they give you permission, you're going to type in the homeowner's name, the property address, and then your email and phone number to contact you to schedule. So just know that you need proof, because CAL FIRE nor the local fire department will want to walk a person's property that doesn't know they're coming. They want to see that they know that you allowed that. Let me look at the chat. I see we see another question. If a home is in a moderate fire zone, does it still require additional fire insurance, or is it a case-by-case basis? Good question, Rebecca. I don't sell fire insurance, but when we look at the fire maps, I'm going to show you something. Insurance companies have their own algorithms and maps and everything to determine whether they're going to require it or not. It has nothing to do with what the fire forms say. If it's in a moderate, first of all, your seller does not have to fill out the FHDS, but they may be required to, they're going to want to take care of their space and protect their home, but they're not required to disclose any of what we just talked about. You're always going to provide the WFDA, the Wildfire Disaster Advisory, but you're not legally required, nor do you want to step on that slippery slope of providing the FHDS that we talked about, or we just reviewed together. That's only for high and very high severity zones, and we talked about the other parameters. At the bottom of this AB 38 page in our report, we also provide you with a link to the CAL FIRE website. This is so good for your sellers because it has several different things to help them get prepared for their fire inspection. It has a D-space assessment, defensible space assessment that a homeowner can take without having CAL FIRE out there, just online. It lets them look at all their vegetation, their home, and basically assess whether or not they would pass or what they need to get done to get prepared for that inspection. It also has videos and lists of everything that needs to be done to prepare for your inspection. So this is really a good site for your seller and or buyer to go to see what needs to be done to prepare. The other way you can work around, if you don't want to have CAL FIRE out there yet, is you could have a tree trimming company that knows, because a lot of these tree companies know what CAL FIRE is requiring, and they could come out and give you a bid on tree trimming and tree removal, and they pretty well know and can tell you, we'll get you to pass your inspection. There are some companies you can search there that exist, like one I found in the Reading area is called Grind. They do travel, but it's a cost. But there are companies near you that will come and do an assessment for you for a small fee, and then give you a bid on doing, if you will, a la carte work or doing it all. So we're talking blowing off the roof, cleaning out the gutters, cleaning out the flower beds, cleaning off the vegetation that's dead or trimming it down, basically trimming the trees up, removal of trees that need to be removed. Discuss with you if the tree is encroaching on your home and very dangerous, but it's protected, how you would go about getting that done and allowances to be able to do that. all of that, it comes into play with getting a company out there to take a look at it that knows what they're doing. But again, the fire department with their inspection will tell you what you need to remove and work with you on helping you know what to do from there. Another resource is if your seller wants to reach out to CAL FIRE or the local fire department and ask PG&E or SMUD to trim or clear out trees that might be near their power lines. Sometimes they're a lot easier to work with. In lower fire zones, you can get it done easier, I find, but in high fire zones, there's so many people are asking for help, and you could wait years for them to come out and do trimming. So just FYI on that, but you can try to reach out. If there is a tree that's really touching all their power lines, they may want to get it removed, and that might help. CAL FIRE also has grants. So every year they have about $5 million in grants for homeowners. I think they'll pay up to $30,000 per parcel to help with tree trimming and tree removal. Those grants go fast. So you want your sellers to jump on getting a grant if they can as soon as possible. I don't know what's money's left. I haven't talked to them in a while, but it goes very quickly. I'll just tell you that. So if you know of anyone who needs help, that's another resource. Hey, just real quickly, I just built this little how to get more business from the NHD. This is the tax data supplementer that we can't speak, sorry, the tax data estimator, which allows you to put in the sale price for a buyer and click the month you're closing, and it will estimate that bill for you. So it's a great reach back for your client. And you can ask for repeat business because you're, calling your client about their bill, reminding they're going to receive it. So if you'd like this script that I wrote on that, and I have another script about PACE, Hero, Y Green loans, because we also provide in the tax data section of the report, if they've got one of those recorded bills on their home, that one of the PACE or Hero or Y Green recorded loans, we're going to tell you that in the tax section. Those are pretty serious. So just FYI, I have a couple of scripts I'm happy to share with you through Lisa if you'd like them. Yes, Amy.
Hey, so on the supplemental tax estimator too, I just wanted to let everybody that's on know today that I've heard Solano County is currently 18 to 36 months behind on their tax reassessments. So if you've got buyers purchasing properties, it's taking a while to get these supplemental bills out. Remember, at close of escrow, they're billed based on the current taxes. It's reassessed usually based on the purchase price or about there. Then they get that special tax assessment. It's not uncommon right now for people to get two sets of the supplemental property tax bills and then it taking 2 to 3 years to get their taxes reassessed, which are also screwing up their payments for those that have their taxes impounded because the lender is only allowed to keep a certain amount of overage in their account. So they're readjusting their payments at a year because the taxes haven't been reassessed. And then once they are reassessed, they don't have enough in there to pay the tax bill. And then they're jumping their payments way high. So just be aware of that. We can talk about that at some point in the future if you guys want to kind of know how to navigate that with your clients to make them aware of that. But do be aware that they are way behind right now.
I hear that all the time. In fact, sometimes they'll get their supplemental tax bill and it'll be like twins. It'll be two bills, not one. And they finally send them the bill, but it's not the whole bill. And then they get another one. So they get the shock of that. So it's really good to have this conversation with them and then remind them. It's a great reason to just reach back to your client repeatedly. Hey, have you gotten that bill yet? I just want to check on it. If your payment is a lot lower than it should have been, be sure you're saving aside this money because you're going to get that shock treatment when they do reassess your taxes. So you want to have that buffer of savings for that when it does get changed to what it's supposed to be. So we provide you a little bit of help in that regard within the NHD. And then I have another script that I wrote on PACE, Hero, and Y Green loans. If anybody would like that as well, those are paying those off can be insane if you've ever had a loan or a seller with one of those on their home. And so it's really good to reach out to your database to educate them on PACE, Hero, how those affect their equity in their home and financing solar, windows, roofings, heat and air, what that could do to their sale price when they sell down the road if they finance it like that for 20 years. You end up paying 100 grand for something you financed for 20 grand. It's ridiculous. So it's a great call to your database if you want to help them save their equity in their home. I see a couple more questions. It's the worst, Amy. You're right. Its pace is the worst. And then I'd be happy to, I'll send both scripts to Lisa, your amazing sales rep that's in the conference room there. And Lisa can send them out to everyone who would like one. And so she's going to she'll probably put in the chat her email and you can reach out to her and she'll send them to you. So here's a message I have. And I'm kind of passionate about this because, it's a big issue. So in our real estate arena, you're all licensed realtors. You're held to a high standard of ethics. If you do something really bad, you get your picture on that Megan's Law for Realtors. You don't want to be there, right? That's not a good sight. If other companies like home warranty, they're regulated by the insurance commissioner. Title is regulated by the insurance commissioner, but Disclosure Source and all other NHD companies are not regulated. Is that crazy? So what it's done is it's opened up a playing field of unregulated companies that have come in that have in their fine print that they won't protect you. If they err on the report, you're on your own E&O. We look at that very differently. We look at the law, what is required by law and it says in the law that we're supposed to defend and protect all parties, but they'll just put it in their super fine print that you're on your own. You expressly waive your rights to Civil Code 2778, which is the code that says we're supposed to protect you. So the difference is with Disclosure Source, we're owned by Fidelity, a Fortune 500 company. We carry E&O on every report. We name in our E&O all parties in the transaction. So we're going to protect you, the agent, the seller, your transaction coordinator, your escrow officer. Everybody is going to be protected with Disclosure Source because we're going to do what the law requires. And that's why it's important to vet your vendor, because the civil code also puts the onus, the responsibility of selection on you, the agent, believe it or not. So when you're making a choice of who to use, please reach out to Lisa. She'll help you. We're here to provide instructional training for, your office, and for you, we're here as a resource in however we can help you. And I'm going to share, I see a couple other questions. Yeah, so if you like, I put that in the chat, and then there's Lisa's information. So if anybody wants the scripts that I wrote, I'll send those over to Lisa after we're finished with the class, and then she can share them with you. I'm going to share with you the CAL FIRE website. So here we are. Everybody can see that? Can get thumbs up? Awesome. So you can search this. So does anybody have one to unmute or maybe in the room with Lisa? Do you have an address that you'd like to search? I want to show you how to use it prior to going out on a listing.
I do.
Okay.
170.
Hang on 1 second. So sorry. Who's talking to me?
Daniel.
Hi, Daniel. Okay, so
Hi.
for everyone on the web or on this class, see this binoculars on the left? Because right now we're looking at, let me pull this down. We're looking at the legend, which is telling us the colors and the severity and who's responsible. So you see this gray here? That's local responsibility area. So if your office caught on fire, if it's downtown Vacaville, it's going to be put out by the local fire department. If a house caught on fire in the local responsibility area, the local fire department would come out and put it out. You see the different zones. So you've got moderate is the yellow, orange is high, pink is very high. This really dark pink is a local responsibility area that's very high. Okay. Go over to the binoculars, click on them, and we get to search an address. So sorry, Daniel, what was that address?
17015 Sonoma Highway. And it's funny because the fire department is right across the street from the home.
Is this in Sonoma?
Yes.
By the way, you're going to need the entire address, not just the street. Okay. Watch what happens. It zooms in really big time. So you can actually, if you can't tell, you can zoom out, you can zoom in. Unfortunately, I'm pretty darn sure this homeowner is in a high severity zone, even though
Yeah.
they're across the street. Across the street is not in a fire zone at all. And to answer and to touch on Amy's question about fire insurance, if I live here in this subdivision on Buena Vista Avenue or Hillsdale or Hillcrest, but my home's on this side of the street, I'm not in a severity zone at all, but I am surrounded by high. Do you think that my insurance is going to require I get fire insurance? Absolutely. And I'm going to tell you, they're in the midst right now of changing these maps. CAL FIRE is revamping all of their maps, and stuff like this, parcels that I'm seeing like this, that are surrounded by high or very high severity zones, are getting encompassed into that particular zone. So this particular home on 17015 Sonoma is in a high fire zone, correct?
Yes, my buyers are looking into it. And this thing is kind of scaring them.
So obviously here's the parcel, and the fire department is right across the street here.
Yeah, it's the building across from when you go past the intersection, that one. Yeah, that's it.
The big one with the big fire trucks in it, right? So the way this
Yeah.
the way this can help you is, I'm going to go out on a listing. I'm going to go take a listing, and I'm not sure if it's in a fire zone or not. I want to be prepared. I want to talk to my seller and see, had you had a fire inspection? Have you done the things you need to do? Do we need to just, how are we going to proceed forward? And so this is going to help you prepare for that. Did you know that you can order your natural hazard from Lisa when you take a listing and attach it? So a buyer that maybe couldn't afford fire insurance, and we know a lot can't, won't make an offer on a house that they see, oh, it's in a fire zone. We can't make an offer because we can't afford the fire insurance. So that's kind of helps you weed out the people who don't want to purchase in an area where they're going to have to pay for fire insurance. So this kind of helps you with being prepared to talk to your seller about how they want to proceed and what they want to how they want to disclose, or whose responsibility is going to take on, meeting the requirements. Like for this particular homeowner, they're in a high severity zone. If they're filling out a TDS and it's residential 1 to 4 units, they're going to need to provide this form. If the home was built prior to January 1st of 2010, they are also going to need to fill out section B of the form. So you have to help the seller decide, how do you want to sell this, with completely all the documentation and showing that they've passed their fire inspection, or do you want to pass it over to the buyer? Those are good things to understand ahead. That's the educated agent that shows up to that listing. Any questions on that? I will be happy to check another parcel. So we've been asked by Denise to look at 4344 Price Lane, Vacaville. Whoops, not Bill. My typing, sorry. That's not good. Did it again. You got to type it right. And it does require at least the city. All right, here's your good news, Denise. You're smack dab in the middle of a moderate, so not yet. If you take a listing there, you do not have to provide the FHDS. You are going to want to provide the WFDA, the Wildfire Disaster Advisory. But you can see they're in a moderate, right in the middle of a moderate, right?
That is my house.
So you probably have fire insurance.
I do. That's in the country, and that's where the Vacaville 2020 fire was all around us.
Yep, but you're in a moderate. So you,
Okay.
by law, do not have to provide the
Okay.
FHDS if you sold your home.
Okay.
So just FYI, why this site, and they're in the midst of revamping it. So let me see if I can find something for you to just show you an example. Let's go over here. This is very high, this pink, right?
Yes, yes,
And here's moderate. Right here, do you
yes,
think I'm gonna have to get fire insurance? Yes. Do you
yes.
think maybe this might end up getting, because here's high and this is very high, these are federal responsibility areas. Don't you think maybe they might put some of this moderate into high or very high? I looked at
Yes.
some maps and I saw the proposed maps on CAL FIRE's website, and they absolutely encompassed moderate areas. They went straight into very high. They didn't even play around and put them in high. So I'm guessing that areas like this very well may be changed on the map as soon as they release their new maps. When you go here, this is the current maps. When you go and they've changed them, you will see areas like this that will be put into very high. And then a seller in this area will need to use the FHDS and disclose if they meet the other parameters, residential 1 to 4 units, because they're in a higher, very high severity zone. This is probably a wildland fire area, by the way, because they both apply high fire zones and wildland fire zones. They map it, I don't know why, but both those directions. So we have to disclose it like that. Does
How
anyone
often do they
else?
change? How often do they change the maps?
They don't change them very often. I don't think they changed them in a few years. But I know I was talking to the deputy chief of Northern California last week, and he told me they're in the midst of remapping the entire state of California. You
Okay.
can go and find their proposed maps on the CAL FIRE website and look at addresses and
Oh,
compare the two, and you will see where moderate zones that you are looking at now have been moved into higher, very high. So most of them are not getting better. They're getting more, they're being moved into
yeah.
more severity, not less severity.
Okay. Since the fire was all around us, it just happened not to come on our street. So I'm pretty sure we'll be going into a different fire zone.
Well, who can say? I
Okay.
can't, I don't work for them. I just talk to them all the time and ask them questions, but this is
Okay.
just a tool I wanted to show you that you can use to help you in whether or not your seller, and then if your seller's not having to fill out not having to fill out the fire hardening and defensible space
Mhm.
disclosure, but you're working with a buyer and you see the parcel that they're looking at purchasing, you go there and you look and it's in a fire zone that you see, that's going to tell you if it's high or very high, then you're probably not getting a TDS. If you don't get the form and it's a home, a residence, in a high or very high severity zone, and they've given you a TDS, then maybe the listing agent doesn't know that they should be providing, and they better provide that form. And they
Okay.
have to have the seller fill it out. Sometimes that happens. I hear about it more often than not. And if you are dual agency, if you are representing both buyer and seller, please be sure to protect yourself by having very transparent conversations with the buyer if the seller is not providing the FHDS as to what they're taking on and what they'll have to do. Because that Fortress Fire Report, I wanted to touch on that's in the RPA. You may have seen it. That is not boots on the ground. That is a report that is done by an independent company called Fortress Fire. Carr is in bed with them. I'm just going to be transparent about it. They wanted us to be, the only way you can order it is to go through a natural hazard disclosure company. We're trying to negotiate with them to provide it without getting paid. All the other NHD companies that jumped on board get paid on it as well. When you look at them, if you haven't looked at one yet, the reason we didn't want to do it is because they are crazy off the chart expensive as to what they're telling your seller they need to do. You can get you can pass your inspection with a lot less done through the CAL FIRE inspection than that Fortress Fire Report. It's $140. It's not boots on the ground. It is aerial imagery of the property. They look at topography, they look at wind velocity versus the elevation of the home and the ground around it. They do a bunch of different things, and then they give you a cost range. It can be, I've seen them anywhere from 20 to $100,000 in defensible space and fire mitigation and fire hardening. And so you don't have to harden your home. You don't have to do the things to the structure itself to sell it by law. you have to disclose. You don't have to, if you're not in a point of sale, do the vegetation. You have to disclose and pass that responsibility off to the buyer. A buyer taking it on has to understand, hey, I might be taking on tens of thousands of dollars in tree trimming and tree removal. And that is a real deal that happens. That's why we have so many lawsuits in the state of California right now over this, because agents didn't really explain to their seller and buyer what they were taking on. So, any other questions I can answer for you? Feel free to unmute. Wow, it looks like everybody's good. They understand. Does everybody feel like they understand the FHDS form now more than they did before?
Yes, yes.
Awesome. Awesome. That's my goal. If you have any questions, again, reach out to Lisa. She is your point of contact resource, and I'm here to help. If a lot of times our sales executives in NorCal just forward me the email and I talk to the agent or help them. I'm going to do that as soon as I get off this one with another agent who's confused and not sure what her seller should do. And so I am there to help, be the back. I'm just in the background. Your rock star is Lisa, and she'll take care of your orders, which are amazing turnaround time, super protection. You can't get any better protection in the industry for your NHD. And then you got Lisa, sassy pants, to help you.
And yeah, that's right. Let's be clear. I am the rock star of all things home warranty. Laurel is the rock star of all things NHD.
Well, but you know, I know for a fact.
I can answer simple little questions, but I send them to Laurel.
Yeah. And if you have questions about, I also talk about FEMA zones. If you're selling in a flood zone, just know this, when you order a natural hazard from us and it's in a flood zone, we're automatically going to pay for you to have attached separately the flood cert. That flood cert is really important because it will tell on that flood cert if the seller or the homeowner has had a LOMAC, a letter map of change. That means they've had an elevation survey at some time in the past, which may have wiped out their flood insurance. My neighbor just built 2 wings onto the back of his house, and we have a creek that runs through our neighborhood, runs right behind his house. My son also has the same creek. He had to have flood insurance. He got that elevation survey because he was doing a build. It wiped out his flood insurance. So you're going to want to look closely at that elevation survey if it's attached to your NHD, and see if you don't need flood insurance, which could help the buyer to qualify to purchase because they don't have to buy flood insurance. And so that might be even a greater selling factor. So we're always going to provide you with a flood cert attached separately if they touch a FEMA mapped area. If they don't touch a FEMA mapped area, you won't need it. So it won't be, because there is no flood cert if they're not in a FEMA map zone. So know that's also provided. We've got a lot of little things that we do, but our turnaround time, that is phenomenal. You order an NHD from Lisa, as soon as she places the order, or if you call or you go on our website and order, it is delivered within usually 30 minutes. So you're going to know what conversations you need to have with your seller and buyer. Any other questions or concerns we can address while we're still here?
Laurel, thank you,
All right, you
so
guys.
much for being on today. I really appreciate it. And Lisa, thank you for arranging this.
Sorry about that. At least it worked out.
Really worked out.
So if you feel still a little bit unsure about the FHDS, I do a webinar every month. I have one coming up next Thursday at 2:00. Lisa can send you an invitation if you want to join. It's pretty much what we went through, but I spent a little more time on it, but not much, you know, so you pretty much got the deep dive. So if you do want to attend, it's open to any agent in Northern California.
All right.
Alrighty.
Thank you, Laurel.
Thank you for joining again.
Thank you, everyone. Sorry we went a couple minutes over, but I hope you thought it was worth it. Call me if you need anything.
Well, we started a couple minutes late, so.
Oh, that's true.
So if you need Lisa to order, please reach out. This is recorded, but her email and phone number is in the chat, and so is mine. If you need us, we're here to help. That's our goal, is to make you the rock star.
All right.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thanks,
Bye,
you guys.
everyone.
Have a great day.